Back in the 1990s, I worked as a housekeeper at a high-end motel in Washington, D.C. My name is Lynn Sile, though most people just called me Sile. I had come to the U.S. as a refugee from Vietnam, escaping a life of hardship and uncertainty. The motel job wasn't glamorous, but I was grateful for it. I didn't speak much English, but I was one of the most diligent workers on staff. Guests often left me small notes of thanks for my meticulous cleaning, and my co-workers trusted me implicitly. The motel attracted all kinds of people: corporate types on business trips, wealthy tourists, and the occasional eccentric artist. But none of them compared to the man who called himself Mr. Malachi. He arrived one humid summer evening, dressed in a crisp black suit that looked tailor-made. His sharp features, slick-back hair, and piercing green eyes made him look like he had stepped out of a noir film. He booked the most expensive suite, the luxurious Suite 13, on the top floor. Suite 13 was the crown jewel of the motel, a sprawling room with a panoramic view of the city skyline, marble floors, and a private balcony. Only the wealthiest clientele could afford it. I was assigned to clean it, but from the moment Mr. Malachi checked in, it became clear he didn't want anyone inside. Every time I knocked, he answered the door with a polite but firm smile, saying in a deep, melodic voice, "Not necessary today, Miss Sile." His charm was disarming, but there was something about him that made my skin prickle, a subtle unease I couldn't shake. He was always courteous to the staff, tipping generously and even engaging in small talk with the front desk clerk, but his presence felt out of place, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. For over a month, no one but Mr. Malachi entered Suite 13. The "Do Not Disturb" sign became a permanent fixture on the door. Rumors began to circulate among the staff. Some joked he was a secret agent. Others whispered he might be a fugitive. I tried not to pay attention to the gossip and focused on my work, though I couldn't help but wonder what he was hiding. Then one morning he was gone. The "Do Not Disturb" sign had been removed, and the suite's door was unlocked. There was no sign of him at the front desk, and the room key had been returned silently during the night. When the manager checked the records, there was no trace of his departure. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The credit card he had used to pay for his stay cleared without issue, so the manager shrugged it off. "Sile," he said, handing me the key to Suite 13. "Go clean it. And don't forget to air it out. It's been closed up for weeks." I hesitated. The unease I'd felt around Mr. Malachi came rushing back, sharper than ever. But I was a professional, and I had a job to do. I took the key and headed upstairs. The suite of secrets. The moment I opened the door, a foul stench hit me like a punch to the gut. It was the sickly sweet, cloying smell of decay, a smell I recognized from the time I'd accidentally come across a dead rat in the motel's basement. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve, and stepped inside. The suite was unrecognizable. This once luxurious room was now a chaotic mess. The plush furniture was overturned. The glass coffee table was shattered, its shards glittering like sinister stars on the floor. Empty wine bottles and cigarette butts littered the room, and the bed, oh, the bed. The silk sheets were twisted into a heap, stained with something dark and dried. But it was the smell that overpowered everything. It seemed to emanate from the walk-in closet at the far end of the room. The door was ajar, revealing only darkness within. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to walk away and leave this to someone else. But curiosity, or perhaps a sense of duty, compelled me forward. My footsteps were slow, deliberate. The closer I got to the closet, the stronger the smell became. My hand trembled as I pushed the door open. Inside, among the scattered clothes and shoes, was a cardboard box. It was incongruously clean compared to the rest of the room, sitting neatly in the center of the closet like a macabre gift. I knelt down, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The box was sealed with duct tape, but the edges were loose. I peeled it back and lifted the lid. What I saw made me scream. The box. Inside the box was a grotesque collection of hair, long, dark, and matted with dried blood. The strands were tangled into a clump, as if they had been yanked out forcefully. Nestled among the hair was a single, delicate finger, severed cleanly at the knuckle. The nail was painted a bright, cheerful red. I dropped the box, stumbling back in horror. The room seemed to spin around me. I clutched my chest, gasping for air, but the smell, the rancid, clinging smell, was inescapable. I turned and fled, my legs barely able to carry me as I made for the door. I didn't stop until I reached the elevator. Even then, I couldn't escape the image of that box, the hair, the blood, the finger. It was burned into my mind, a horrific tableau I would never forget. The aftermath, By the time I reached the lobby, I was barely coherent. The staff gathered around me, their voices a blur as I tried to explain what I had found. Someone called the police, and within minutes, the motel was swarming with officers. Suite 13 was sealed off, and I was taken to an ambulance to be checked out. The investigation that followed revealed that Mr. Malachi was a ghost in the system. The credit card he had used was stolen, and his ID was fake. The box in the closet contained evidence linking him to a string of unsolved murders across the country. The hair and finger belonged to a young actress who had been reported missing weeks earlier. I never returned to the motel. The experience left me shaken to my core. For months, I couldn't sleep without seeing that box in my dreams. Even now, decades later, the memory lingers. I often wonder who, or what, Mr. Malachi really was. And I can't help but feel that I narrowly escaped becoming his next victim. The storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving, as I drove down the deserted highway. Rain lashed against my windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. It was well past midnight, and exhaustion had settled into my bones. My name is Cale, a freelance photographer who had been on a solo road trip, chasing inspiration and trying to escape the monotony of city life. The accident up ahead had delayed me for hours, and now I was desperate for rest. When I spotted the flickering neon sign in the distance, a wave of relief washed over me. The sign read Sunset Motel, though the S had burned out, leaving it as Unset Motel. It didn't inspire confidence, but I was too tired to care. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the empty lot. The motel was a single-story, L-shaped building with faded, chipped paint. Weak, flickering lights cast eerie shadows across the puddles that had formed on the ground. Not a single other car was parked in the lot, and the place looked like it hadn't seen a guest in years. Still, I needed sleep more than I needed comfort. I grabbed my bag and trudged through the rain to the small office at the end of the row. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, and a bell jingled overhead. The scent of mildew and stale cigarettes hit me immediately, making my nose wrinkle. Behind the counter sat a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His gaunt face, sunken eyes, and thin, greasy hair gave him a rodent-like appearance. His small, pale hands rested on the counter, the fingers twitching slightly. When he looked up at me, his lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Need a room?" he rasped, his voice as dry as sandpaper. "Yes," I replied, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. "Just for the night." He nodded, reaching under the counter. His hand trembled as he pulled out a key and slid it across to me. "Cash only," he said, his gaze lingering on me a moment too long. I fumbled in my wallet, pulling out the cash. As I handed it over, his fingers brushed against mine, lingering just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. A shiver ran through me, but I dismissed it as paranoia. "Room 7, he said, pointing down the row of doors. "You'll be fine there." There was something unsettling about the way he said it, but I muttered a quick thanks and hurried out into the rain. Room 7 was easy to find, though the chipped numbers on the door barely clung to the wood. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, flipping the light switch. The room was a disaster. The wallpaper was peeling in long, curling strips. The carpet was stained with dark patches I didn't want to identify. The bedspread was tattered, and a strong, musty odor hung in the air. When I turned on the bathroom light, I saw roaches scatter across the cracked tiles. Disgusted, I backed out of the bathroom and dropped my bag on the floor. There was no way I was staying in that room. My car, though cramped and uncomfortable, was clean and safe. I locked the motel room door behind me, got back into my car, and reclined the seat as far back as it would go. The rain had let up, and the sound of it tapping gently against the windshield was almost soothing. Exhaustion overtook me, and I eventually drifted off. I woke up to the sound of hushed voices. Groggy and disoriented, I rubbed my eyes and looked around. It took me a moment to remember where I was. The motel parking lot was silent, save for the faint sound of rainwater dripping from the roof. Then I saw them. The man from the check-in desk stood just outside room 7, holding a flashlight. He was speaking in low, hurried tones to another man I hadn't seen before. The second man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a hood pulled low over his face. Despite the distance, I could feel his presence, heavy, menacing, like a thundercloud about to break. Together, they entered room 7. My heart raced as I watched them from the safety of my car. The flashlight beam darted around the room as they moved inside. They were searching for something, or someone. For me. My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me. The check-in guy had expected me to stay in that room. They thought I was in there now. I slouched lower in my seat, trying to make myself invisible, and prayed they wouldn't notice the car parked just a few feet away. The minutes dragged on like hours. I watched as they rifled through the room, pulling open drawers, flipping the mattress, even checking under the bed. The taller man said something to the clerk, and they both stopped. They exchanged a look before heading back to the door. The taller man stepped outside first, his hood still obscuring most of his face. I held my breath as his gaze swept across the parking lot. For a terrifying moment, his eyes seemed to linger on my car. I shrank down even further, willing myself to disappear. Finally, he turned away. The two men walked back toward the office, their shadows long and distorted under the flickering lights. As soon as they disappeared into the office, I knew I had to leave. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keys. I started the engine as quietly as I could, but the sound seemed deafening in the stillness of the night. For a split second, I thought they'd hear me. I glanced back at the office, but there was no movement. I backed out of the lot, keeping my headlights off until I was far enough down the road. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. My heart pounded in my chest, and every nerve in my body screamed for me to put as much distance as possible between myself and that motel. The rain had stopped, but the night was still dark and heavy. I drove for miles before I finally dared to turn on the radio. The low hum of music filled the car, a small comfort in the aftermath of my fear. Hours later, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I found a diner. I was still too shaken to eat, but I needed to gather myself. I ordered a coffee and reached for a newspaper someone had left on the counter. As I flipped through the pages, a headline caught my eye: "Local motel shut down after investigation." My stomach dropped as I read the article. The Sunset Motel had been raided by police the morning after I left. The owner had been arrested on charges of human trafficking, drug smuggling, and other crimes too heinous to list. The article mentioned that Room 7 had been a trap room, used to lure unsuspecting travelers into a web of unspeakable horrors. The police had found evidence of torture devices hidden in the walls and traces of blood in the carpet. My blood ran cold as I realized how close I had come to becoming their next victim. I sat frozen in the diner booth, the coffee growing cold in front of me. The events of the night replayed in my mind, each detail sharper and more horrifying than before. I had escaped with my life, but the memory of that night would haunt me forever. Driving alone through the countryside was supposed to be relaxing. The rolling hills, open fields, and occasional clusters of trees stretched endlessly in every direction, giving me a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. My name is Aloan, though my friends call me one. I had spent the previous night at a quiet farmhouse, a charming little Airbnb nestled in the middle of nowhere. The farmhouse had been peaceful, almost too peaceful. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. After spending the morning there, I packed up and hit the road. The plan was to take my time driving back to the city, maybe stop at a diner along the way. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized I had underestimated how far I was from civilization. Darkness fell quickly, and soon I was driving down an empty stretch of road with no streetlights and no cell service. The only sound was the hum of my car's engine and the occasional chirp of crickets. I told myself I'd find a motel soon, but as the hours dragged on, fatigue began to set in. The thought of falling asleep at the wheel terrified me, so when I spotted a small, run-down motel on the side of the road, I didn't hesitate to pull in. The motel looked as though it had been forgotten by time. The paint was peeling, and the neon sign flickered weakly, casting a sickly green light over the empty parking lot. The words vacancy and office buzzed faintly, their glow barely piercing the darkness. My car was the only one there, and I couldn't help but wonder if the place was even open. I parked near the office and stepped out into the cool night air. The sound of my car door closing echoed unnaturally loud in the stillness. As I approached the office, the faint smell of damp wood and mildew greeted me. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and a bell jingled overhead. Inside, the air was thick and stale. The front desk was cluttered with old papers and a dusty lamp that barely lit the room. Behind the counter sat an old man with wiry gray hair and a distant, glassy look in his eyes. He wore a wrinkled plaid shirt, and his bony fingers tapped rhythmically against the desk. "Need a room?" he asked without looking up. "Yes," I replied, my voice sounding too loud in the oppressive silence. "Just for the night." He nodded slowly and reached behind him for a key. "Room 12, he said, handing it to me. His hand brushed against mine, and I noticed how cold and clammy his skin felt. Cash only. I handed him the money and forced a polite smile, but something about his demeanor unsettled me. His eyes lingered on me for a moment too long before he nodded toward the door. Room's at the far end. Sleep tight. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Room 12 was the last door in the row, farthest from the office. The chipped number barely clung to the wood, and the door itself looked like it had been repaired multiple times. I unlocked it and stepped inside, flicking on the light. The room was every bit as depressing as I had expected. The wallpaper was faded and peeling, and the carpet was threadbare and stained. A single weak bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally. The bed had a lumpy mattress covered in a scratchy-looking blanket, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth. I tossed my bag onto the bed and sat down, trying to ignore the unease creeping up on me. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was just an old, poorly maintained motel. Nothing sinister. But as I lay down and stared at the cracked ceiling, the feeling of being watched refused to go away. The silence in the room was oppressive. I could hear the faint hum of the light bulb, the distant chirp of crickets outside, and my own breathing. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself to sleep. I don't know how long I lay there, but at some point, I must have drifted off. I woke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. Something had woken me, but I didn't know what. I lay still, straining to hear any sound, but the room was silent. Then I heard it, a soft rustling, like fabric brushing against the floor. My eyes snapped open, and I sat up in bed, scanning the room. The light was still on, but its flickering cast shifting shadows across the walls. For a moment, I thought I was alone. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, near the foot of the bed, was a figure. It was hunched over, its back turned to me. The shape was unmistakably human, but something about it was wrong. Its movements were slow and deliberate, as if it were searching for something. "Hello," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure froze. Slowly, it began to turn its head toward me. My breath caught in my throat as I saw its face, or rather, the absence of one. There was no face, no eyes, no mouth. Just a smooth, featureless surface where a face should have been. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was paralyzed with fear as the faceless figure stood and began to move toward me. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. Finally, my instincts kicked in. I scrambled out of bed and back toward the door, my eyes never leaving the figure. It didn't stop. It kept coming, its head tilted slightly to one side as if studying me. My hands fumbled for the doorknob. I threw the door open and ran outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My fingers shook as I struggled to unlock the door. When I finally got in, I locked the doors and started the engine. I glanced back toward room 12, half expecting to see the figure standing in the doorway. But the room was dark and the door was closed. For a moment, I thought I had imagined the whole thing. Then I saw it. In the rearview mirror, standing at the edge of the parking lot, was the faceless figure. It didn't move. It just stood there watching, or at least I thought it was watching. I didn't wait to find out. I floored the gas pedal and sped out of the lot, my heart pounding in my chest. By the time I reached the next town, the sun was starting to rise. I found a diner and pulled into the parking lot, my hands still trembling as I turned off the engine. Inside, I ordered coffee and tried to collect my thoughts. As I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. The image of the faceless figure was burned into my mind, its smooth, featureless head tilted in that unnatural way. I told myself it wasn't real, that I had been dreaming. But deep down, I knew the truth. When I finally got back on the road, I made a silent vow, no matter how tired I was, I would never stop at a rundown roadside motel again. Whatever I had seen in that room, it wasn't something I ever wanted to face again.